Not yet.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. We are very excited to have you with us this morning. I know all of you are also, as well, very excited about this topic. Actually, the waiting list of individuals who are interested in taking this class goes on and on. I understand this topic as it is so critical. A number of people have said they simply cannot get enough information about this issue because it does relate to the work you'll be doing in the future. So it's not just, though, about the topic, it's also about our presenter, Carol Tipton. And with that, I'd like to take this time to introduce Carol Tipton to you. It's kind of strange for me to do this because I've known Carol for I don't know how many years. I think it's been about 20 years now. I know her as a colleague as well as a good friend of mine. So I'll do my best to try to summarize all that I know about her and her background for her introduction. And Carol, should I miss anything, you feel free to add in and fill in the gaps.
I will.
Carol has been an instructor for over 30 years. She actually taught here at Gallaudet University in 1978. She taught non-credit continuing education classes as well as courses for credit. In addition to this work, she's also a member of the faculty at Catonsville Community College in Baltimore. And Carol, you're retired now, is that correct?
Quote-unquote retired, yes.
She's not retired. We all know she's not retired. She says retired, but I think we could see otherwise from her. I don't know anyone who works nearly as much as Carol does. During her retirement, I should add. Today, Carol's here to talk to us a little bit about test preparation for the RID-NIC exam. And she is an ideal person for this kind of lecture. And I say that because she's worked with RID for a number of years. She's been involved in multiple capacities on committees for RID over that time. She was the first chair of the RID committee that worked to develop a code of ethics for our profession. She also served on the Blueprint Committee. The Blueprint Committee was the one that came up with the first written certification exam. She was a member of the RID Professional Standards Committee. And in that committee, she worked to develop standard practice papers for our profession. Carol's also served as a member of the RID Certification Council and Professional Development Committee. Carol's a test administrator herself for the RID, and also she coordinates the RID exam test site at Catonsville. In that capacity, she administers both the written test and the performance test for certification. Carol is also a certification maintenance program coordinator for PCRID. She served on the 2010 and 2012 NAOB Conference Committee and on the 2011 and 2013 RID Conference Committee. With that, please join me in welcoming our presenter today. Thank you.
Thank you for that warm introduction. We good? Okay. Thank you for that warm introduction, Bev. As she said, we have known each other for many years, both personally and professionally, so I'm glad she didn't tell too many stories out of school this morning. We do have some adventures that we have shared together. So I really appreciate being here this morning. I know that all of you who are in this room and all of you who are out there in cyberspace somewhere, I believe there are about 350 of you viewing this webinar today. I know that many people are interested in knowing about the National Interpreter Certification Exam, and that's what we are going to be covering today, the interview and performance portion. Before we get into the information about the test, those of you online who have not yet taken the pre-assessment, please do so at this time before we get started in the content. You have a copy of the address. And if you want to download the PowerPoint, you can do so. This PowerPoint will be available after the session, and those of you who are watching by webcam can download the PowerPoint now. I know that some of you downloaded the PowerPoint previously, but as presenters often do, this one has been tweaked a little bit even as of last night. So what you see today will be slightly different from what you were sent previously. Now, if you have questions during this presentation, those of you in the room, feel free to raise your hand and be called on. You may either sign your question from your seat, and the interpreters will voice and or copy sign your question. Those of you who are viewing on the webcast, you may email Hillary Mayhew at GURIEC@gallaudet.edu. Email your questions, and they will be transmitted at various points throughout the webinar this morning. We will be taking a 10-minute break kind of at the midpoint, probably around 10:25 or so, to give you an opportunity to stretch and do whatever you need to do. So those are the housekeeping issues with the webinar and the presentation. First of all, all of the information presented today is public information. So please don't ask any questions about test content. I have seen the test as a test administrator, but I will not be able to answer any questions, specific questions about test content. And secondly, I am not a rater. If I was a rater, I would not be allowed to give this presentation today. Not only am I not a rater, I'm not intimately familiar with what the rating system involves. I know generally about how the test is rated, but not specifically. So don't, feel free not to ask questions about the rating system, at least the specific questions. So, what will we be doing this morning? We have some learning objectives. First of all, by the end of this presentation, you will be able to describe the components of both the interview and the performance portions of the NIC, and be able to describe the expectations of what you need to do in order to pass the NIC, both the interview and performance. So those are our learning objectives, our major learning objectives this morning. It's important to know that this test was developed jointly by the NAD and the RID. You might not be aware, most of you in the room and maybe those of you online look rather young, at least compared to myself. You all look really young, but you may not be aware of the history. In the past, RID developed its own test, very often without consulting the NAD or the deaf community. It was done in isolation. And then NAD developed its own testing instrument. There were competing systems, not a good state of affairs. But it's wonderful that the NAD and the RID got together and jointly developed the NIC, both the first version of the NIC and the version that we're using now. there is a certification committee. It used to be called Certification Council. When I joined that committee, it was the RID Certification Council. That was during the time that the NIC was being developed. Then when the NIC became live, the Certification Council consisted of half members were from NAD, half of the members were from RID, and that has remained true ever since. And it's wonderful collaboration. It's good that we can work together because we should work together. On the NIC, you will find that there is more emphasis on interpreting from ASL into English, more than previous tests that were given for certification, for national certification. And the reason for that is if you talk to deaf people, usually most deaf people you talk with have some kind of horror story where an interpreter misrepresented them, was not able to read their signs and do justice to the message that they were trying to convey. So this test makes sure that an RID, NAD, RID certified interpreter is able to adequately interpret from ASL into English. So you will see more emphasis on voicing. As you know, in our field, we have had many names for certification. We started out with the CSC, and if you didn't quite pass the CSC, you might have passed the IC, TC, or RSC, all these alphabet names. Then it was the CI and the CT. Then it was the NIC Advanced, the NIC Master. That is just real confusing, not only to folks in our field, but also to hearing consumers, to agencies that want to hire interpreters, trying to figure out, well, how does a CI compare to an NIC? It was an IC, the same as a CI. What does all this mean? So RID announced last summer at the conference that from here on out, all national certification exams will be called the NIC, the National Interpreter Certificate Exam. All of it will be NIC. As you are probably aware, there was an original version of the NIC, and that one had two versions. That was version A and version B. Now we have the new, what's called streamlined NIC, and it has version C and version D. So there are two versions of the test. If you do not pass when you take the test the first time, you may come back 6 months later, after your test date, 6 months after your test date, to retest. You will be given a different version, but they are psychometrically equivalent. They have been tested and examined and shown to be equivalent. Then if you don't pass that one, you can come back 6 months later and take the version that you took the first time. And you can do this until you pass. Now, RID wants to develop a new testing instrument. And they plan to do this periodically in the future as well. As we know, there is no such thing as a perfect test. There have been issues with all tests that RID and NAD have developed. This one is not an exception. RID and NAD want to improve not only the testing instrument, but the testing experience of people. The current test, the current version of the NIC that we have now, will most likely remain in effect until 2016, maybe 2017. But this year, 2014, RID will be conducting a job task analysis. They did this prior to the previous version of the NIC. And from the job task analysis, they will be working and developing a new testing instrument. At the RID conference in Indianapolis last summer, there was discussion about having the testing program become accredited. And to have it be accredited, it means that it will move out of RID and will be housed by some other entity, probably an entity that will be created. This is all in the talking stages right now. Expect to hear more discussion about this. It's not a done deal, but RID is investigating that. It will look really good for the credential if the test is accredited, if the testing program is accredited. There are issues now with the certifying body being the membership organization, so that might change in the future. And if that does happen, RID may become what is called a voluntary organization. Right now, when you become certified, well, first of all, when you take the test, you don't have to be a member of RID. But in order to maintain your certification, become part of the CMP, the Certification Maintenance Program, you do have to be a member of RID. Because RID owns, well, RID and NAD own the test, and you join RID to maintain your certification, earning your CEUs. If the testing program is moved out of RID, RID will be what's called a voluntary organization. You may join if you want, and hopefully most interpreters will want to join the RID. And RID's main emphasis will be on improving the delivery of interpreting services to benefit our consumers, and also to lobby Congress and be influential with laws that are coming up that may influence the ability of interpreters to work in different settings and enhance the livelihood of professional interpreters. So those are thoughts that are coming up for the future. I haven't heard anything recently about any of them, but do expect the job task analysis to be starting soon. I'm sure at the next RID conference there will be more discussion about these other two possibilities, about accreditation and RID becoming a voluntary organization. The upcoming job task analysis will cover three main components. First of all, hearing consumers will be consulted to find out what they expect from interpreting services. We've often overlooked the needs of hearing consumers. We've been focusing on the needs of deaf consumers, but hearing consumers will be included in this analysis. Then it will be determined how we can tell, how we can differentiate an entry-level interpreter from a more advanced interpreter being one that holds national certification, that holds these credentials, how we can really show the difference. What skills, what abilities, what knowledge does a certified interpreter need to have that an entry-level interpreter is not yet demonstrating. So that will be determined. And then they will address the best test design. We've had many different permutations of testing. We've had live panels, we've had video, we've had scenarios actually play on the screen. We've had a number of different test designs, both written and performance, interview performance. For example, with the CI and CT, there was no ethical component, and that was supposed to have been taken care of with the written test. But when the NIC was developed, the interview portion was added. So all of this will be examined to determine what is the best way to test someone's knowledge, skill, and ability in order to be certified. People have wanted to know what the passing rate is for the current test. We haven't had any statistics until relatively recently, in the last couple of weeks. This report came out, and it shows that from December 1st, 2011, which was when the NIC first, this version of the NIC first came out, up until November 11th, of 2011, not even a full year, and I don't know why it wasn't a full year and why those dates were chosen, but that's the data that we have. It shows that 30% of people who took this version of the NIC did not pass. Some of the reason for that most likely has to do with people not knowing what to expect when the new test came out. There was not a whole lot of advanced information about what the test would consist of before it came out, before it became live on December 1st in 2011. I see several hands. I saw your hand first. Passing. That's those,
Thank you.
Yeah, we have other statistics, which I will share next, which are more hopeful. Other questions? I saw some other questions, other hands. I guess that was the same question. Okay, so when the test first came out, it was very different, especially the interview portion was totally different from the first NIC. And people not having opportunity to prepare and know what to expect, most likely they didn't pass because of the interview. I don't know that for a fact, but this is what I'm thinking probably happened. Now, we have other statistics that just came out. This is for a full year, the fiscal year of 2012, which means starting in July of 2011 through July of 2012, the passing rate was 42%, much better than 30%. And I think that with continued training, professional development opportunities, study groups, classes, focusing on the test, people have a better understanding of what to expect. And I would expect that the passing rate will continue to go up. Of course, the test is very rigorous, skill-wise. It's not only about memorizing what you need to do to answer the interview portion. You do have to have a high level of skill, both in signing and in interpreting from ASL to English, in order to pass. It's not an easy test. In the report that came out in February, it showed that the weakest area of interpreters taking the NIC. The weakest area was in interpreting from ASL to English. And as was mentioned earlier, the NIC focuses more on that skill than previous tests did. And I hear from many interpreters throughout the country, especially educational interpreters, that many of them get very little, and some get no experience voicing, going from ASL to English in their daily work. There are very relatively few interpreters that do a lot of interpreting from ASL to English. And fortunately, with technology, it's possible to practice by looking at videos online, but I don't know how many interpreters actually do that. We can do that, and it's a good resource to have. So who can take the NIC? Well, you have to be at least 18 years of age. And that kind of goes without saying, since now we have the new educational requirement. And that comes up next. Well, I'll just put it all up. You have to be hearing. You have to be able to function as a hearing person. I know several certified interpreters who are a little bit hard of hearing, wear hearing aids, but they can hear enough that they can access the test materials during the test and pass the test. But you have to function as a hearing person. You need to have knowledge and skills to qualify to pass the test. You have to meet the education requirement. And now that consists of a bachelor's degree or the equivalent. And I don't know of many 18-year-olds who have achieved a bachelor's degree. But I guess it's possible. And when you take the test, you need to agree to abide by the Code of Professional Conduct. In addition, to be eligible to test, you need your bachelor's degree from an accredited school, or there's an alternative pathway that examines the courses that you've taken, credit courses, college courses, continuing education that you have taken, some life experience, and some experience actually working as an interpreter. And each of these elements accrues points. And if you add up your points, if they add up to a certain number, then you qualify for the alternative pathway, and you don't actually need a bachelor's degree. If you are already certified, you do not need to take the written test. You can go right ahead and take the interview and performance test. Those are individuals that hold NAD, 3, 4, and 5 level certifications. If you have the IC and TC, the CSC, the MCSC, see how many letters we have, the CI, the CT, the NIC, the NIC Advanced, or the NIC Master. Going back to the idea of alphabet soup, a number of states put names of certifications in their legislation, and when tests change, it's very difficult for legislation to change. So that's another reason why RID wants to stick with the name NIC. It'll help state lawmakers. If you have taken the written test and passed it, you're eligible to go ahead for the interview performance test as long as you have the degree. If you are certified with an RSC, an oral skills certification, and an EIPA certification level, you still have to take the NIC written test before you can take the NIC performance test. Okay? So to register to test, RID needs to have your transcript. It takes several weeks for RID to process your transcript. So if you plan to test next month, you may not be able to if you submit your transcript today. So allow enough time for them to process your transcript. So you send in your transcript, your application, and of course the payment to RID. You have to do that before you're eligible to test, to register. You will receive what's called an authorization to test letter, the ATT. That is really important. You must have that before you can register for a testing appointment. You will find that on your member portal on the RID website that is now live, up and running. The new website has been launched, and we're back in business. So you'll find your ATT letter there. You email a copy to a test site coordinator. You contact the test site coordinator. Find out when they have availability for testing. It's interesting. Some people email me and say, well, I want to test on May 16th at 3 o'clock. Well, unfortunately, the test takers do not determine the dates of when testing takes place. There are test administrators, TAs, at each site, and the test site coordinator arranges with the TAs to find out when they are available, and that's how dates are determined. So when you contact the test site coordinator, ask what dates are available and what times are available. And then you send that person your ATT letter, and they will give you a testing appointment. If you have special needs, for example, if you have a reading problem, maybe you have some dyslexia, you can ask for special accommodations during the test. What typically happens during the test is you get more time to read the text materials during the test. That means that the test administrator is in the room with you while you're testing, not looking at you, but the test administrator is able to stop the test or pause the test so you can have more time to read the written materials. If you are pregnant, we've had a number of people test who are 9 months. I really get nervous, but so far, so good. People are pregnant, they might need crackers, a little queasy stomach, or drink water. I mean, normally you're not allowed to bring food or drink in the testing room, but if you're pregnant, I mean, you need permission, but it's always granted. If you have diabetes and you might need something to stabilize you in case of an issue. If you're asthmatic, I've had people have asthma attacks during testing, you will be permitted to bring your inhaler in with you. I mean, but you need to ask in advance if you need special accommodations. If someone has visual problems and needs the test materials enlarged on the screen, that can happen. However, the image cannot be larger than real life. That doesn't happen very often, but you can get special accommodations if you need them. Currently, there are about 50 test sites throughout the country, and they are listed on the RID website and also in the views with contact information for the test site coordinator. RID will soon be launching a new delivery system for testing in which the recording of the candidate will be sent directly via the web to a rater, or to raters. As it is right now, we record onto a DVD, and then the DVD has to physically be mailed to RID. RID parses it out and sends different parts of it to different raters. And that takes an awful long time, and it's a lot of work at the national office. But hopefully in the near future, I mean, they tried to start this last summer in July, but they want to be sure that there are no glitches, because can you imagine taking your test and having it be sent out and get lost in cyberspace with no recourse? Yes, a question. As I said previously, I'm not privy to the raters pool, the rating system, but there are 3 categories of raters. There are deaf raters. Deaf raters rate the interview portion. They also rate the ASL, English to ASL portions. There are hearing raters who rate the ASL to English interpreting, and there are interpreter raters. And they could rate any of the scenarios, but who they are, and it's top secret. Nobody knows. Even when I was on the Certification Council, I didn't know until about 3 years into working there who the raters were, and that, of course, has changed. But there are those 3 categories. Okay. With the new testing platform, where the test materials will be sent directly to raters. It won't be live streamed. I mean, while you're sitting in the test room, the rater cannot look and see what you're doing right at that moment. That would be a little stressful. It's recorded and then sent to the rater electronically. When that system is up and running, and hopefully it will be soon, we keep hearing that it's going to be soon, and it's going to be soon, and it's going to be soon, and eventually it will be soon. They hope to have 150 test sites throughout the country. Right now, especially in Region 2, we don't have a whole lot of test sites. There's one here at Gallaudet. There's one at CCBC in Baltimore. That's it for Maryland. There are none in Delaware. There's one in western Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if there are any in Virginia. So there are not a lot of test sites where a lot of times people have to drive long distances, stay in a hotel, and test in a site far from home. But with the new platform, they hope to have 150 sites available, and you will be able to test closer to home, probably also have more flexibility on dates when you test. So look for announcement soon about when that becomes live. Okay, I see a question over here.
Actually, I have a couple questions. First off, do you know how many raters there are? And my second question is, let's just say a person has taken an exam more than one time. Will their test be sent to the exact same rater, or is there any guarantee that a new person will be reviewing and rating their test?
I don't know. To both.
To either? Okay.
I don't know how many raters there are. I do know that if a rater knows you personally, when they see your video, they, oh, I know that person, they need to send it back.
They will or they should?
The raters, I have full confidence. I don't know because I'm not privy to the rating system. I do know that they need to abide by a set of standards, and they are told they need to do that. I'm sure that no one is going to police them and check their history to see if they actually know somebody, but they are supposed to. Okay? All right. So if you need to cancel a testing appointment, that needs to be done about more than 3 days prior to your appointment, unless, of course, there's some kind of emergency, and you need to document the emergency. If you have a death in the family, an accident, an illness, hospitalization of self or immediate family member, or if there is a natural disaster. I mean, we do have natural disasters in this area. We had an earthquake a couple years ago. We have hurricanes that happen every so often. Other places like Hawaii have severe storms. So if those things happen, you can cancel your appointment at the last minute, but you do need to provide documentation. If you are late to your testing appointment, it may mean that you lose the opportunity to test and you have to pay the fee all over again. So be sure to be on time. If you're running late, call the test administrator and let them know what's going on. I know they will try to accommodate you, but for example, in our site, we may test 8 people in a day. It takes about an hour for each person, and if one person is 30, 45 minutes late, that would throw off the whole rest of the day. So be on time. Most people are. Occasionally things happen. You are required to say that you will not disclose any test information, content information. That includes discussion with peers. Even if 2 of you are good friends, you're from the same town, you travel together to the test site, you both take the test the same day, and then you drive home together, even then, you're not supposed to discuss the test materials with one another. I know in previous tests, information got out there. People knew things that really it's not fair if you know what is going to be tested in advance. So think about that before discussing with anybody. If you try to steal test materials, I know at our site that would be really difficult because they're locked. Well, they're under three or four sets of locks. You'd have to go through 4 levels of security to get the test materials. And even then, it would be difficult to seed the test materials because you need a passcode in order to access them. But if someone is caught stealing test materials, there could be serious consequences. If you try to cheat in some way, you could be prosecuted. You could spend time in jail. You would be fined, and all kinds of nasty stuff will happen. So don't try to cheat. People People often want to know how much the test costs. It's not cheap. But if you're a member of RID, it's less than if you're not a member. And if you have to take the test again, the retake fee is less than when you take it the first time. So if you're a member, you pay $385 right now to take the interview performance test. If you have a retake, it's $335. What a bargain. But it's good to pass it the first time. As was mentioned previously, the current version of the test is recorded onto a DVD. Your test is physically on this piece of plastic, and that piece of plastic has to make its way safely to the RID office and be processed. Soon the test will be streamed to raters. Right now, the results take about 2 to 3 months, which is not too bad. But with eliminating the middle step in the national office, having to parse out all the tests and send each part to different raters, with that step eliminated, they expect the results to come back in 2 to 3 weeks, which is great. It's hard to wait. So the wait time will be much less. On the test, you are not to give your name. When the test starts, you are only to give your member number twice. So don't say your name. Some people in the testing room, they say, my name is, oh, then we have to stop and do it again. So only your number. So now let's think about what a test is. I mean, as students, we've all taken tests in school. A test never says that it will capture everything you know about a subject. It's a sampling of things that you know, that kind of a test. That's a content test. This test is a performance test. It means that you are asked to perform a certain task, similar, not exactly the same, but in a similar way to what you would do on the job. Again, it is a sampling of your skill. It would not be possible, it would not be consistent to follow an interpreter around for a year and see everything that they can do, because not everybody has the same experiences. So we have a sample, and a performance test asks you to perform the task that you're being tested on. You have to show that you can do this skill. That's what a performance test is. It contains a representative sampling of the skills that were shown to be important, and these came from the 2002 role delineation study that RID conducted. It surveyed thousands of interpreters. I don't know if any of you were part of the survey. I was part of it, and it was extensive. They did this role delineation survey to figure out what skills, what knowledge, what abilities interpreters needed to have in order to perform their job. And then out of these, they have broken them down into subpoints. These are available online. And when the test was developed, they looked at these domains. There are 10 of them. We'll be going over them later. Looked at the 10 domains and then made sure that all of the key components were included in the test. And they made sure that one skill was not overly sampled and another one undersampled. They tried to do this in an even way. I know when I was on the committee that developed the first written test, we had a big map, big chart, with all of the different domains. And when we constructed questions, we had to identify which domain we were writing questions about to make sure that questions, this is the written test, make sure that the questions adequately sampled the subject matter. And there weren't like 20 questions about one topic and only one question about another topic. It had to be even, it had to be balanced. The same is true for the performance portion. They look at all of the skills, and they've designed the vignettes specifically with those skills in mind to represent what interpreters need to do a good job. We've heard about test validity. Test validity means that the test actually tests what it says it's testing. If you go and you want to be qualified as a typist, they wouldn't ask you to peel potatoes, for example. So an interpreting test will ask you to actually interpret. The kind of validity that RID uses for the NIC is content validity. And we already talked about that, how they sample the different domains to make sure that the content of the test accurately represents those domains in the right percentage. From the report that was shared earlier that recently came out, it says that each question in each vignette is specifically tied to one or more of the domains outlined in the role delineation study. So they looked at this very carefully when they were constructing all of these vignettes. And they weighed the different skills. The skills were weighted so that the more important ones were covered more extensively in the test than the lesser important skills. And that's important to know. There's another type of validity. Oops. Wait. There's another type of validity, which is face validity. That is not statistically validated for a test. It only means that the test looks and feels like it's testing the right thing. It's not necessary for a test to have face validity in order to be valid. It's nice, but that doesn't always happen. You may be aware that there have been some concerns raised about the test format, and you will experience that today. You'll be exposed to to how the test is set up and see how some people are concerned. I think that these concerns mainly address the issue of face validity. Some aspects of test design and test administration don't feel like what we do in our work as interpreters. That does not automatically determine that the test is invalid. It's just that it lacks face validity. A test also must be reliable. There's several ways of getting to reliability. One of the main ones is called inter-rater reliability. That one is the one that RID has focused on the most. RID frequently sends out test videos to raters so that all of the raters get the same video. They don't know which one is a test and which one is the real thing. And then their ratings are compared to see if they agree. And what happens, oops. What happens is that two raters will rate a certain vignette, and that's how they determine inter-rater reliability. And there's more. When two raters rate the same vignette, RID discovered that they agreed 79% of the time, which is acceptable. It's acceptable statistically. But that's not good enough. What happens if two raters disagree, and again, they're rating if somebody passed or failed that particular vignette. If they disagreed, then a third rater is brought in, not knowing that their vote is the one that's most significant. Third rater is brought in, and that rater, of course, will agree with one of the other two, and then the divergent score is thrown out. So if the first one, this one says pass, this one says fail, the third one says pass, then the third one, the second one is discarded, and both of the raters say pass. Eliminating that divergent score means that the inter-rater reliability becomes 100%, which is pretty high. That's about the only kind of reliability that this test could be reasonably expected to show. There's another kind, test-retest reliability. That's when someone takes the same test after a period of time. The results should be the same. But with this test, you can't possibly take the same test twice within a year. And in a year's time, your skills could significantly have improved. So that kind of reliability is not used. But inter-rater reliability is used, and it's very high for this test. We need to remember that this is a test. It's not real life. It is conducted in an artificial environment. And they try to make it feel like you're actually in an interpreting assignment by camera angles during the performance portion. You see the presenter. It can feel like an actual assignment, but it isn't. It's a test. It's a controlled environment where everybody who takes the test experiences about the same conditions, because each test site has a different layout of their room, but the testing materials that someone is exposed to are the same. The materials are the same throughout. Everybody gets the same thing. So we need to remember this is a controlled environment. It's not a real-life interpreting situation. It's like when they test automobiles, they test them in a lab. They don't really test them totally on the road for engine performance. It's the same kind of thing. It's a testing environment. So as was mentioned earlier, this test was developed by using a job task analysis that was conducted prior to 2011. They used interpreting experts who came up with knowledge and skills that were necessary in order to perform competently. They used the results of this to construct the actual test. The test is periodically reviewed. I know that when I was on the Certification Council, every 2 years we had to look at all of the testing instruments to make sure they were still up to date and still valid. And that process has continued to this day. And then the psychometricians and subject matter experts periodically come in and modify. They can modify a test. This happens more with the written test, as we've had developments in our field. The performance test has not been changed since it came out in December of 2011, because all of the test administrators have a test, I have 2 test DVDs, one version C and one version D. So if they wanted to tweak one of the scenarios, one of the vignettes, that would be difficult to do logistically. I think in the future, the test materials, the source materials, will be available electronically as well. And when that happens, different individual scenarios can be tweaked and replaced with older ones. That's something for future consideration. But as we know, every not couple of years, but maybe every 5 years or so, a new test is developed. We don't know what the next version of the NIC will look like, but we will by 2016, hopefully. I see a question over here.
So those who want to get the NIC, do you recommend that we go ahead and take it now, or should we wait till the new testing material is out in 2016?
There are several factors that would weigh into that decision, one of which is when did you take the written test? Because when you take the written test, you have 5 years to take and pass the performance test before you have to take the written test again. So if you're coming up on, if you took the written test a year ago, the new test might not be available for 2 or 3 years. And then once it comes out, you need to retrain yourself in order to be prepared for the new version of testing. If you haven't taken the written test yet, you may want to wait. A lot of people want to try to take the test. It's whether you pass or not, it's a valuable experience just taking the test, just to see how you fare. You do get feedback, not specific feedback, but you do get feedback of areas where you need to work. So it's a good experience to take the test. And who knows, you might pass, and then you won't need to take the other one. So, again, it's an individual thing. Okay? The previous NIC test had issues with people in the beginning not knowing how to respond to the ethical scenarios, the interview portion. So for the first time in history, RID made available the rubric that the raters used to help people prepare. And as you know, there were a lot of formulas that came out, different mnemonic devices to get through the interview portion. And RID and NAD really want to know if you know your stuff, not if you can memorize a trick to get through a certain portion of the test. So a rubric is no longer available. However, there is a listing of possible test results. This is as close as we get. You can have a pass, and that's what you want. Means you can do the tasks that are asked on the test. There's also a borderline pass, and that's a pass. No one will ever know. You show your credential, I'm NIC certified. It doesn't say borderline, it just says NIC. Then there's a borderline fail. That's probably the most frustrating result because it means you're just below passing. But it's probably a good indicator that next time around you'll pass. Then there's fail. We don't like that. But again, you get feedback. You can't, we're going to talk about appeals in a minute. You cannot appeal your score. Because of this inter-rater reliability, I mean, at the beginning, RID did do some of that. And when I was on the Certification Council, NAD and RID did allow that to happen when the test first came out, just to verify that the raters knew their stuff. And invariably, the results came out the same. There was a question one time, somebody took the test, and the first time around, they got NIC Advanced, and they were hoping to get NIC Master. But the second time when they took the test, they just got NIC. And they said, oh, something's wrong here. But what happened in checking the scores, the first time around, they just barely made it to Advanced. And the second time around, they were almost up to Advanced. So the differences in the scores were not statistically significant. So you cannot challenge the rating of your test. I see 2 questions. Hillary.
We have a question from the online audience from Mike Chapman. Says, if Rater A and B disagree with one vignette of the test and Rater C is brought in to break the tie, will Rater C rate the entire test, all vignettes, or just the tied vignette? And if C rates all the vignettes, then are Rater C's non-tied vignettes completely ignored?
Wow. Okay. One rater does not look at the whole test. Raters are specifically trained to look at certain portions of the test. I don't know if one rater only looks at one portion or if one rater may look at 3 portions of the test. I don't know. But I do know that one rater does not see the whole thing. That doesn't happen. If A and B disagree and rater C is brought in for that vignette only, then rater C breaks the tie for that vignette. I hope that answers the question. And there was another question back here.
I don't know. Maybe it doesn't apply anymore. But the situation that you were just talking about taking the exam and getting the advance and then taking it again and then you just pass it with the NIC. So in that particular situation, are you required to take that second exam result and keep it, or was that person allowed to keep the advance? I don't know that really applies because we are just going with a pass-fail for the test, but I'm wondering, were they able to keep their advanced certification, or what happened?
You could keep the one you wanted.
Great, thanks.
So we don't have levels anymore, but if that were to happen, you would not lose that certification, because when you took that test on that day, back 6 months earlier or whenever, you showed that you qualified at that level. So you could retain that. Okay? All right, moving along. Now we're going to talk about what to expect on the day of testing, what to bring. You need to dress professionally. That does not mean wearing a suit. You need to look like you look when you go to an interpreting assignment, and not an interpreting assignment in a pigsty on a farm, not that, but looking professional, however that means. It's good to, of course, wear plain clothing, of course, as interpreters. I know looking at my closet, dark, plain, everything. That's what we do. If you have dark skin, it's most likely a good idea to wear clothing that is darker than your skin, because on video, that will accentuate your facial features. If you have really dark skin and you wear something light, your facial features can be silhouetted and difficult to see. So test it out. In the testing room, you will be able to see yourself, to see how you look on screen. You might want to bring a jacket or a different change of clothing just to make sure that what you wear will accentuate your facial features and won't be distracting. For women, especially, watch out for cleavage, jewelry. Don't wear anything that could be distracting or get in the way. But look professional. I've seen some people come to the testing appointment wearing jeans, but wearing a nice top. You don't really see, you can see from when you're sitting, you can see like from your lap up. I've had people take off their shoes. They don't see your feet. If you want to be comfortable, take your shoes off, relax. Don't relax too much, but take your shoes off, be comfortable. That's fine. You don't have to wear uncomfortable high-heeled shoes and you're thinking of the test, oh, my feet hurt. No, be comfortable, but look professional. I have a question over here.
Do you have a choice to stand or sit?
Wait for the next slide or two. Okay, you need to show a government-issued ID, such as your driver's license or a passport. I think everybody that has come to test at our site, and I've been testing people since the year 2000, over 100 people a year. So that's a lot of people. I think everybody brings their driver's license. A number of states, including Virginia, don't allow you to smile anymore, and for your driver's license, you look like you're taking a mug shot. They want you to look like you look when you're pulled over, not, hi, I'm pulled over, I'm so happy. But you need to have a government-issued photo ID. A work ID doesn't cut it. It needs to look like you. Bring your ATT letter with you. And it needs to say, when you get your letter, look to make sure it says version C or D. Sometimes that information is omitted from the letter. If you don't have it, the test administrator doesn't know which version of the test to give you. And if you're testing on a Saturday, nobody's at RID to ask them. So that's pretty important. When I get the ATT letters before, I mean, in order to make an appointment, you have to send in your ATT letter. When I get them, I make sure to check that version C or D is indicated, and if it isn't, then I will email RID and say, hey, which version of the test should they take? And it's usually, they usually respond in a day or two. So check for that. Bring your letter. Okay, we have a question from our online audience.
Yes, Suzanne Terrio asks about letters. She said, what safeguards, if any, are taken to prevent unethical people from obtaining certification? For example, in medical school or law school, you have to have first-hand contacts, like advisors who can make recommendations for the person seeking credentials. In the interpreting field, since people are coming from all points of contact, what kind of recommendation letters are requested from reputable trainers or interpreters in the community for the candidate?
Right now, it's self-credentialing. In order to get your ATT letter, you have to prove that you have a degree. You have to send in a transcript to RID. That's your ticket. And then when you come to the test site, that's why the test administrator has to check your photo ID to make sure that that's really you. So that's the only kind of check and balance. We don't have recommendations. When I joined RID back a while ago in the 60s, not anybody could join RID. You had to get a couple of letters from people saying that you were an interpreter. Like, I wasn't really an interpreter. Nobody was working full-time as interpreters back then, but you had to get a recommendation even to join RID. That's not the case anymore. If you want to spend the money, you feel that you have a chance to pass the test, or you want the wonderful experience of going through a test, you're welcome to do that. The only thing that is checked, of course, is your ID. I hope that answers that question. The last page of your ATT letter is something called your vignette indicator card. You see what one looks like up there on the screen in the room. It won't be all zeros. Don't bring this one. It will have your member ID on it, and as I said, that's part of the ATT letter. That is absolutely necessary to bring with you, because you need to show that as the test goes on. That's an indication to the RID office that, oh, here's the start of a new vignette. So you need your vignette indicator card. You can't bring anything with you into the testing room, including water. You're in the testing room less than an hour. So hopefully you can live without your water for that time, unless you're pregnant or have diabetes or whatever, and you've gotten special permission to do so. But the only thing you can physically carry into the room is your vignette indicator card. I think we will stop. I think we will stop here for a break before we go into the next section. We will be back according to the clock in the room. It's 10:23, 10:24. So we will be back at 10:34. So you can stretch or do whatever. See you back in 10 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will, yeah. Yeah, sure. It's so cool you can monitor. Mm-hmm.
In the room, haven't yet registered, so come see me in just 1 minute over there.
Okay. And we're going to cover that about half the sit. 6'2". Yeah, right. Well, we have to adjust the camera. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, just I'll answer them one at a time. I can't remember them all. to say welcome back. I'm glad you're here. Yeah, oh, yeah, don't say that. Don't just say welcome back. I am blah, 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 and I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm glad at the end. Where is she? Deb might want to say something to us. They're discussing that now. I don't know for sure.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a chance to kind of rest and refresh your minds a bit before we get started again, because we're just about ready to start with our second portion. I did want to briefly explain, again, I'm Beverly Halra. I'm the director of the Gallaudet University Regional Interpreter Education Center, otherwise known as GURIEC. We are members of the National Consortium of Interpreter Education Centers. We receive grant funding to sponsor this workshop, as well as other trainings and workshops that we make available. If you'd like to know a little bit more about upcoming workshops and other events, I'd ask you to look at our website for information. That's a GURIEC. I think it's gallaudet.edu.guriec. I did want to make sure that all of you are able to get CEUs if you're interested in receiving those. If you are here in the room, I just ask that you be sure and sign up on the sign-up sheet so we know that you're registered. For those of you who are watching online, you're also able to look underneath the video screen. You'll see a link that's made available there. If you click on that link, you'll be able to complete the evaluation and send that in. In return, you'll be getting CEUs. Is there anything else I missed, or have I covered everything? Okay, thank you very much, and let's return back to Carol and her material. Oh, one other thing I wanted to add. I neglected to mention something very important. Carol's very humble, but she is Dr. Carol Tipton. So let me use her appropriate title in my introduction.
Thank you, Bev. Good to be back. For those of you who are watching online, be sure to ask any questions by emailing guriec@gallaudet.edu. Before we left for break, and during the break, there were several questions that came in from our online audience, so we will address those at this time.
Great. We have another question from Mike Chapman. He says, I am tall, over 6'2", and would prefer to stand during the test, but don't want to be looking down at the materials while testing. I would rather have them at eye level. Can I ask for accommodations for that, as in adjusting the videos to eye level?
The camera is always adjusted to however tall a person is. In an upcoming slide, you will see that everybody is required to sit for this exam. So you will not be able to stand. But even when you're sitting, some people are taller than others. The camera is adjusted, so you look great in the screen, and the testing materials should be just about eye level.
Okay, we have another question from Mary Sue. She is asking, will a master's degree become the educational qualification in the future for the NIC?
There has been no discussion that I know of to make that a requirement. If it happens, it won't be for a while. Again, RID is a member-driven organization. The impetus for requiring first an associate's degree and then a bachelor's degree came from the membership. If enough of the membership feels that a master's degree should be the credential for an interpreter, a certified interpreter in the future, then that might happen. But as far as I know, there has been no discussion about that. And there was one more question.
Yes. Courtney says, if there are 4 levels, passing, borderline failing, and failing, but the results simply tell you pass or fail, why have the 4 passing criteria if they don't share that information with you? She understands that the feedback you get says good, marginal, weak, or poor in relation to your interview or performance, but you're not told if you are a borderline pass or a borderline fail.
For each criterion, you have you have 4 things, and they correspond to the pass, borderline fail, and fail. So if you have your strong, your marginal, your weak, and your poor, they correspond to that. So you can see for each vignette on your test how you did. So I hope that answers that question. Any other questions before we begin? Okay. Barbie.
So if you're going to be graduating very soon, and you don't have an official transcript yet, but you will be receiving one, how do you manage that? Are you able to actually go ahead and book an exam time for a future time after graduation when you have that document? Or do you actually have to wait until after you graduate and get that official transcript so it can be sent in instead?
The transcript that RID requires does not have to be sealed in an envelope, the official transcript from the school on paper. You can use your online course list. I don't know if they will accept a current semester. I know some of you in the room are seniors. You will be graduating next month. Congratulations. Awesome. I don't know if that will count, if they will expect that you will graduate, or if you actually have to graduate first. I mean, you could send in that you are taking these classes and you expect to graduate next month, and then as soon as you do graduate, send in. And those grades are reported on your online reporting system pretty soon after finals are over, probably within a week. So I think that's how that's handled. Any other questions before we move on? Oh, okay, one more online.
Anne asks, since the rubric for the interview portion is no longer available, is there anything you can share as to what to expect about this portion? Yes, okay.
Yes, we'll be devoting most of the next hour to that. So, yes, absolutely. We're going to be talking about that in depth. All right, let's move along. Okay, when you arrive, of course, you have to show your lovely photo ID. People from Virginia feel sorry for you because, anyway, most of them look good. You show your ATT letter. Then you have to sign the candidate agreement form. You can find that in the candidate handbook. Most of what I'm sharing today comes from the candidate handbook, and that's available on the RID website under NIC. And also the job task analysis and the role delineation study appear in that portion of the RID website. You do need to sign this agreement form, and among other things, it says that you agree to have your test video used to train raters. Before that was optional, now it is not. And you agree to not disclose any test information, and there are several other things on the candidate agreement form. So you sign that, and again, you show your vignette indicator card. The test itself, from the time you arrive until you are finished with the test, takes about an hour. It's a streamlined test. The previous NIC took about 2.5 hours, and the TA had to go in and out of the room 10 times to start and stop the camera. This one is much easier. You sit, and it's one setting, and it goes all the way through the test. It's not very long. I know this is, oops. This is what you were eagerly awaiting, several of you. You have to be seated throughout the entire exam. Somebody asked, well, there are breaks during the test. Can I get up during the breaks and stretch? And I guess so, as long as you're back and sitting before the next time. Some people have back issues and don't want to sit for the whole time. The chair should be comfortable. It shouldn't have arms. It shouldn't be a swivel chair, and it shouldn't have wheels. You're sitting there. It should be comfortable. Your feet should be comfortable on the floor, but you do need to remain seated for the testing time. Question?
The previous slide asked about, oh, I'm sorry, I've just forgotten. Oh, I know what it was. It did say that it is an interactive, or there's an interactive portion of the test. Did I get that right?
We'll talk about that when we talk about the performance portion. There are some vignettes on the test that are interactive in nature, where you see a deaf person and a hearing person interacting.
Okay. So that being the case, if I'm sitting there, let's say the previous clip was one that I had to go into English, I'm wondering exactly how it is that I'm able to ensure that the timing is accurate, because if I'm speaking English and I speak a little bit longer than the next piece of the stimulus comes on, how is that time managed?
That's coming up in a future slide, but it's a very good question. It's an issue that a lot of people are concerned about. Okay. You're given 5 pieces of scratch paper. They are supposed to be numbered. When you leave, all 5 pieces of paper need to stay in the testing room. You may not take anything with you. Don't try to sneak one in your pocket or anything like that. So you have your 5 pieces of paper. Oh, and you may only start writing after the camera is turned on. We will share soon about the interview portion. You will need to have memorized the CPC, and a lot of people want to get in the testing room before the camera's turned on and write down their little cheat sheet of how to remember the CPC. You can't do that. You have to wait till the camera's turned on, the TA is out of the room before you start writing. Unlike the previous version of the CPC, you have no choices in this one. Everybody gets the same test. In the previous CPC, in the previous NIC, all this alphabet soup, in the previous NIC, you could choose whether you wanted the interview first or the performance first. You got to choose your interviewer for the ethical portion. That's not the case anymore. You go with what's given. It's very consistent across test takers. the ethical portion must be responded to using ASL. With the previous NIC, you were told that you could answer in ASL, you could use signing in English order, you could even use C signs, you could use SimCom. But in this test, they expect the response to be only in ASL. The test consists of 7 vignettes. The first 2 are interview. They relate to ethics. And the last 5 are performance. Now we're going to talk about the interview portion and what to expect. You do need to be able to evaluate a situation and apply the Code of Professional Conduct to that situation. They want to see critical thinking on the part of the candidate. So on the screen, you will see a written description of the context. What is the situation about? It's all in writing. In the previous NIC, you had somebody signing this information to you. This time, you see it in text on the screen. And just FYI, there is a separate screen for each of these pieces of information. On this test, they tell you what the problem is. In the previous test, you were given a situation, you had to identify the problem. But in this test, you're explicitly told what the ethical dilemma is. You're also given a written explanation of what the interpreter did. In the previous NIC, you had to come up with what the interpreter should do. This test is very different. You know what the interpreter did. Question?
So when do we justify our response? When we justify the response for the ethical part, can we only use the CPC, or can we mention other researchers who have spoken on that particular topic?
The instructions say to use the CPC. I know the previous NIC expected you to use other resources that could include research and laws and articles and books. This one focuses solely on the CPC. And in this exam, you must answer from what's called a prescribed point of view. You are told whether you will be defending the actions of the interpreter or whether you should criticize the actions of the interpreter. You do not decide what you will do. Again, this is different than the previous NIC. Question?
Yes, sorry again. So that means, let's say, if I decided that I'm going to defend that interpreter's action, and they want me to instead criticize what I think was an accurate response, suppose that happens. How do you handle that?
One of the criteria for in the letter that you get back if you don't pass is following test directions. And that could come up. Let's say it's possible, and this comes up later in the presentation today. Let's say that a scenario is presented and you see what the interpreter did, and you feel that that was an appropriate response, appropriate action, but then you're told to criticize. You have to see something about that you can criticize. So you do have, it is a prescribed point of view. It's not your opinion. Yes.
Okay, so if it says you should defend or criticize a response, are you given time to consider that response, or do you have to
4
immediately
minutes,
answer?
and that's coming up. You have 4 minutes to formulate your
Sorry.
response. No, it's not, no. No, you have time to think, and you should use all that time. It says in the candidate handbook that you need to refer to specific tenets and sections of the NAD-RID Code of Professional Conduct. Now, when we think about the CPC, we usually think about the tenets and the illustrative behaviors, but it also says we can use other sections of the CPC, and we're going to go over what some of those are. Because all of the information does not appear on one screen, it comes up at a predetermined time interval. You might be thinking about, you see the situation and the problem, you know what the interpreter did. You might be starting to write down, you think of portions of the CPC that apply, so you're writing. And unbeknownst to you, up on the screen, it tells you what the interpreter actually did. Oops. If you miss it, you won't know how to criticize or defend. Or you might see what the interpreter did and you're thinking about, and then you miss whether you're supposed to criticize or defend. So be sure to keep your eyes on the screen. If you want to make notes, I suggest you do it. Practice writing notes without looking at the paper. Unlike the other NIC, you don't have any audible beeps that indicate that it's coming to an end or there's a new slide on the screen. Yes?
So that 4 minutes wait time, is that actually before or after I'm asked to defend or criticize the interpreter's action?
It's a total time. The 4 minutes includes seeing this information and formulating your response. So the total time is 4 minutes.
So in that, I see a variety of different screens, and once all of them are done, then I have time to consider my answer, and then I'm filmed, my response is filmed?
So the slides come up one at a time, and then you have how much ever time left. I mean, the clock starts counting down when the first bit of information comes up. So it's 4 minutes, and I think it counts down every 10 seconds. So keep an eye on that. Once the last, the instruction whether you are to criticize or defend, once that is there, you have the remainder of the 4 minutes to formulate your response.
Okay.
Okay? Was there a question from online? Okay.
Mike says, maybe kind of a dumb question, but will they give us something to write with along with the 5 blank sheets of paper?
Yes, absolutely. And one time, we always would give the person a pen. One time the pen ran out of ink in the middle of somebody's test. And she could have come out during one of the breaks, but wasn't aware of that. And she made it through and she did pass, but we always provide 2 pens, just in case. So yes, you will have a writing implement given to you. Question?
So you mentioned that when you're responding, you have to be able to really tie in the tenets of the CPC and also the specific section. So, I don't know, should you say like it's 2.1 or 2.2 of the CPC? And I think what you said is that if we don't do that, that means that you won't pass? I mean, like say, for example, if you include the tenet, but maybe not all of the specific portions under that one general tenet, will you get points taken off?
The instructions say to refer to specific tenets and sections of the CPC. I don't know if people have omitted the numbers, like they might say you shouldn't discriminate based on age. That's something near and dear to my heart. But they don't say that that's 2.1. I don't know if they would still pass the test. It's safe to give the numbers, to give the references as much as possible. Okay? So after the 4 minutes of prep time is up, you have 3 minutes to formulate your response. The time appears on the screen. You should be looking at the camera for this, but out of the corner of your eye, look to see how much time is left. If you practice these scenarios, you can practice in a study group or on your own, you get a feel for the time and be able to formulate, present your response within that 3-minute time frame. If you finish early, unlike the previous NIC, you just have to sit there. You can't fast forward to the next scenario. At the beginning of the test, there's a 2-minute introduction to the test and to the interview section of the test. If you have the practice DVD that you can purchase from RID, that material is essentially the same as on the practice test. So that might be a good time if you want to write something, maybe your little cheat sheet, and I don't want to call it a cheat sheet because it isn't, your memory aid to the CPC. You can do that during those 2 minutes. You form your response for 4 minutes, as we said before. You respond in 3 minutes. Then you have a rest break for 2 minutes. And you have a 2-minute rest break after each vignette, of course, except the last one. Some people have found that to be very helpful. It allows them to clear their mind, to just sit back and relax, do some yoga poses, whatever you want to do, pray, whatever. Doesn't hurt. Others find the 2-minute rest period too long. I mean, you're sitting there, the camera is still running, and you have nothing to do. You can't prepare for the next scenario because you don't know what it is. But do expect that the 2-minute rest period. And then the same format is followed for the next ethical scenario. So that's the time frame involved. These are portions of the CPC that may be referenced during the test. First is the scope, and they're all included in the introductory material to the Code of Professional Conduct. Normally we skip over this first page, but it's important. The scope of the CPC applies to all settings. The philosophy of the CPC can be cited. It can be extremely valuable, that the deaf community has the right to full and equal communication and to participation in all aspects of society. You could apply that principle to almost all situations. And another portion that many interpreters like to use is the idea under the function that interpreters do no harm. There might be a consequence of a decision that would cause harm, and we don't want to do that. So that's another thing that can be used. how the CPC is applied. It applies to certified and associate members, certified members of NAD, interns, and students. So even if you are just a student, you're expected to abide by the CPC. Also, there might be a situation come up where a federal or state law would supersede the CPC. And that is, of course, allowed. And the CPC applies to both face-to-face encounters and remote, like with video relay or video remote interpreting. It's good to know what these definitions are when you take the test. A lot of people get messed up with this first one, colleagues. Colleagues, and especially the tenet number 5, respect for colleagues. Colleagues refer to fellow interpreters. So if you are an educational interpreter working with a teacher in the classroom, according to the CPC, the teacher in the classroom with you is not a colleague. That person is a hearing consumer. So in your discussion, if it has to do with a professional that you're working with, that hearing professional is a hearing consumer, not a colleague. A conflict of interest, according to the code, and when you respond, only has to do with conflicts between private interests and professional interests. There are other kinds of conflicts of interest, but for purposes of the test, follow the definition that's in the code. And then consumers, we already talked about that. There are deaf consumers, hearing consumers, hard of hearing, deaf-blind. If they're not a fellow interpreter, then they are consumers. There are certain parts of each tenet that can be quoted during the interview portion. Of course, we have the main tenet itself, and that's usually pretty brief. Like confidentiality, interpreters adhere to standards of confidential information. Then there's a guiding principle, and these guiding principles are listed in the PowerPoint slide. Then under each main tenet, there are a number of illustrative behaviors. Now, these illustrative behaviors are just examples of how that particular tenet can be applied. They don't cover all situations, but they do cover quite a bit, and all of this can be used in response to the ethical questions on the test. So you do need to know the CPC backwards and forwards, and any other way that you need to know it. You need to know the numbers. I would suggest that if you know of somebody who did not use the numbers and they still passed, let me know. I haven't heard of anybody doing that. Question?
I do know someone who has passed without including the numbers.
Okay,
Just wanted to let you know.
We have it. Just new information. Somebody passed without citing the numbers. Okay.
I just want to put that out there. It's not necessarily that they didn't pass or passed because they didn't have the numbers, but it does support their expertise, their knowledge, and maybe there's another reason that they passed it. So maybe the numbers not being included didn't matter because their other skills shine through.
Just throw that out. Yeah, good. It's safe to include the numbers. You won't be dinged for including the numbers as long as you get them right. But it's possible to pass without. You might get a higher score if you show that you know the CPC. So what the raters are looking for is your ability to evaluate situations, apply the code, demonstrate a thorough knowledge of the code, which numbers are part of, and then interpret and apply the tenets that are in the code. So this is what they are looking for. Critical thinking is involved here. Now, people have asked how best to memorize the CPC. A lot of people find it helpful to use this video. I don't get any financial kickbacks from this at all. It's a WINC video, Personal or Professional, the Ethics Conundrum. It has the Code of Professional Conduct in ASL. Some people have found it helpful to memorize the CPC first in ASL rather than memorizing it in English, because on the test, you're expected to give your response and cite the tenets using ASL. So this is a very good resource. Then I want to give a shout out to Sarah Smith, who was a former student at CCBC and also here at Gallaudet. She developed a color-coded chart that many people have found helpful, and she said that I'm free to share it. She didn't even say I had to reference her name, but I do want to give her credit for developing it. So whatever way works, some people come up with 3x5 cards with each of the tenets and illustrative behaviors on the cards. Whatever works for you, you do need to memorize the code. As mentioned previously, RID has not made public the rubric that the raters use to evaluate your ethical response. And the situations that come up on a test, don't expect them to be clear-cut. As we know, there are a lot of gray areas in our work where something can go either way. And that's why it's possible, maybe your first inclination would be you want to support the actions of the interpreter, but you're asked to criticize. Well, since it is a gray area, there is room for criticism. You might experience this on the test. You feel strongly that, oh, the interpreter did the right thing, and then you have to criticize, or vice versa. Just be aware of that, be ready for that. And as you practice and look at different scenarios, one good resource is the Encounters with Reality book, the 1001 Scenarios. As you look at scenarios, see if you could both go through and defend the actions of the interpreter and then go back and criticize the actions of the interpreter for the same scenario. That might be a good way to practice. We have a question from our online audience.
Some of us missed the DVD info. Could you give the title again?
It is called Personal or Professional, the Ethics Conundrum. And the person who produced it, it's a WINC video. And Paula Browning is the one who is presenting the material on the DVD. So if you go to WINC Videos online, www.winkshopasl.com, you can find the ordering information there. Okay. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to formulate a response. First of all, this is something that David Evans always said when he taught the NIC workshop for the previous NIC. Look engaged. Look like you are enjoying this experience. We know that as interpreters, we have to be actors, Every time we go to a situation, we take on the role of our consumers. So we should be able to act. Look like you can't wait to show how much you know about the scene, not in an arrogant way, but you're professionally engaged, you're interested, you're there, you're present, you're engaged. You may want to have an introduction. You need to have some kind of introduction to what you're going to say. And it's better to say the CPC supports or criticizes the actions of the interpreter rather than say, well, I support or I criticize. It's not you. You're using the CPC. It's more professional to say the CPC either defends or criticizes the actions of the interpreter. It's probably a good idea to have at least 3 or 4 references to the CPC. This is my opinion only. There's nothing official in the candidate handbook that says this. But if you only have 1 or 2 references, it may mean that your knowledge and understanding of the CPC is somewhat limited. When you cite a reference to the CPC like 2.1, 2.1 talks about providing service regardless of race, color, national origin, gender, religion, age, disability, sexual orientation, or any other factor. Let's say the scenario has age as a factor. This is my opinion. Again, it's probably not necessary to list all of the possible situations that might come up. I don't think you need to show that you've memorized this whole list. You only mention the part of an illustrative behavior that applies to the situation. Another example is 3.5, that interpreters should be unobtrusive and exercise care in choice of attire. If the situation relates to dress, then you would quote that portion of the illustrative behavior. There's a question from our online audience.
Julie asks, do you have to say tenant 1, subtenant 1.3? Is it just the tenant, or should we quote the subtenants as well?
It's a good idea to quote the subtenants as well with the numbers. Of course, if you say 1.3, you know that it's talking about the first tenet of confidentiality, and 1.3 is the number of the illustrative behavior. So yes, that's a good idea. Okay. When you cite references to the CPC, it's a good idea to put them in order of relevance to the situation, not the order in which they appear in the code. That shows that you have the ability to analyze the situation and know what is the most important thing to mention first. And then you explain briefly how that scenario, how the portion of the code applies to the scenario. You give a synthesis. And then at the end, you may want to have closing remarks. You may want to say, in summary, this interpreter, the CPC supported this interpreter because, and then you might want to just reference the main tenets, because they maintained confidentiality, they respected consumers, and they went for professional development, whatever. You might want to have a closing remark. One thing on the rubric for the old NIC was that the interpreter looks confident and organized. So if you start your response with an opening first, you look engaged, like you love being there. It's so much fun. You look engaged, you have an opening statement, you look confident, you have your main points, and then you follow those points in order, and then you have a closing statement. The raters will love you. It's nice to follow directions. The raters can go check, 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 check. They had all the pieces, and it's so clear. Rather than something that is off the point, and you mention this, and then you mention that, then you go back to the other one. The raters won't like that. So we need to keep the raters happy. And, of course, ASL only. We're going to, we have a question from our, let's wait a minute. We have a question from our online audience.
Jamil said, just to clarify about the language, you can sign ASL, PSE, etc., but your response to the interview must be in ASL?
You need to use ASL throughout the test. For the ethical scenario, when you're responding, it has to be in ASL. Later on, we'll see that for the performance, the instructions say to use ASL as well. So no C or no PSE or whatever, just no SimCom. Use ASL. Think ASL. Okay, we're going to examine an actual scenario. This is something that I have prepared. RID, based on experience from the previous NIC, does not want presenters modeling how to respond to an ethical situation. So I will not sign this. I will give what a possible response looks like. It's in text. You can read it and refer to it as a guide. Of course, you will probably find that when you try to put it into ASL, the structure, the format will change somewhat depending on your organization. But let's go ahead and look at a situation. Okay, the interpreter has gone to a place of business. The deaf employee is having a meeting with the supervisor in the supervisor's office. Happens often enough. Okay? So normally, if you have a supervisor sitting behind a desk, a deaf employee, the interpreter sits somewhere in between, maybe closer to the supervisor, so the deaf employee can see both the supervisor and the interpreter together. But in this situation, the deaf employee asks the interpreter to sit right beside him, which is unusual. Okay? And in this situation, the interpreter complied, sat next to the deaf person. And the task is to defend the actions of the interpreter. Now, you could probably make a case for criticizing the actions of the interpreter in this case, but the instructions here say to defend. So I want you to think briefly, what tenets come to mind? I know you probably haven't memorized the CPC, but what tenets come to mind? Let's take just a couple of seconds, and I will share what I came up with. I don't want you to respond right now. Just think in your mind what tenets you think would apply here. These are some that could apply. The first is the guiding principle for tenet number 4, respect for consumers. And you will probably really like tenet 4. That can apply to almost all situations, unless the situation only has to do with a colleague. So guiding principle 4.0 says that you are to honor consumer preferences related to interpreting dynamics. So yeah, that does apply. You are to consult with appropriate persons regarding placement of the interpreter. Who is the best person to know where an interpreter should be placed? Usually the deaf consumer. .5 says to avoid giving personal opinions. So if you questioned in that situation, if the interpreter questioned, like, why am I sitting next to you? Shouldn't I be, that would be giving your personal opinion. So these three portions of the CPC seem most relevant. So let's see how we could frame a response. I think you will have access to this PowerPoint either now or afterwards. It will be archived for a couple of weeks, so you will have access to this. You want to plan your introduction. As I said before, you want to show your organization. Some people ask, well, do I need to tell the raters what the situation is? Do I need to rehash the whole situation? The answer, this is my opinion, the answer is no. The raters know what the situation is. You only have 3 minutes to respond. If you were to rehash the whole thing, it proves that you know how to read. Not that you can analyze the situation. Use all the time to analyze the situation, and through your analysis, you will show that you know what the situation entailed. And then you state in your introduction that the CPC does support the actions of this interpreter in this situation. Then you will show how you will prove your case. So you may want to say something like what appears in this slide. That's not coming up. There it is. So your introduction shows that you are going to make your case by citing these 3 references to the CPC. And, of course, set them up either in space, enumerate them, and come back to the same points. Again, you expand on how this particular part of the CPC applies to this specific situation. And again, the same thing. You expand on how that particular tenet applies to the situation. And guess what we'll do for the third one? So again, you show that you understand the principle behind that illustrative behavior and demonstrate that it can apply to the situation. Then, if there is time, you may want to have a summary statement. You do need to close your discussion by doing something. If you don't have a lot of time, you could simply close by saying, the interpreter clearly followed the CPC in this situation. You may want, if you do have time, you may want to recite the same references again. Okay, that's just a sample. We have another example coming up. I'll do this. This is so in this case, everything is on one screen. Remember, in the actual test, it won't be. But the situation, deaf person in the ER, sprained ankle, not seriously impaired or injured or sick. There's some kind of heated discussion nearby that is accessible to the interpreter, and the interpreter decides not to interpret what's going on in the next cubicle. And your task is to criticize. So just take a moment and think of parts of the CPC that apply to this situation. So these are 4 that do apply. Render the message faithfully. 4.4 is one of those that applies to most situations. If you're stuck to find something, 4.4 is a great one to turn to. Facilitate communication, access, and equality, supporting the full interaction and independence of consumers. Good one. And another one, assessing consumer needs, and then quoting from the philosophy. Because of time, I will just show the slides for you to read. We won't discuss them. You'll have a copy of the PowerPoint, and then we can get on and talk about the performance portion. If you are criticizing the actions of the interpreter, you may want to include what the interpreter should have done. You can put that into your argument as part of your analysis of the situation. Question?
During the second ethical vignette, should I avoid referring to the first part? Because they're really considered, or they're going to be sent rather to two different raters, so I shouldn't include references to the first
Correct.
vignette.
Treat each section of the test as an individual whole. And don't refer to something like, as you know, I said before that you should respect consumers. No, we need to include your discussion again. Other question?
You had mentioned previously that all the questions will have an answer of it depends. So should we include something, for example, if the interpreter asked the consumer if they wanted to have the rest of the information going on in the environment? Would I include that in my answer, or would I not? Would I just respond to the information that was given to me and nothing more?
As I said, if you are criticizing the actions of the interpreter, you may include what the interpreter could or should have done that would have been better. You don't have to, like the previous NIC, you don't have to go through the interpreter could do this and this was the consequence and this long-term, short-term. Don't get into any of that, but really concentrate most on, in this situation, criticizing the action of the interpreter. We have a question online and then another question in the room.
Ashley asks, will there be 4 screens that appear during the 4 minutes? One for context, a new screen for ethical dilemma, then the interpreter's action, and the task?
I'm not sure exactly, but if you look at the practice DVD that you can purchase from RID, the formatting is very similar to that of the actual test. Question in the room.
So if you have to criticize, you use the CPC to justify that, correct?
It should work together. If you're criticizing and you say what the interpreter should have done, it's the
And
same.
then you would cite the CPC.
Yeah, the
tenet to
same
that.
principle should apply there. So
Okay.
yes. Okay, I think this concludes our discussion of the interview portion. Are there any questions about that before we go on to the performance? Our time is running out here. Yes, Barbie.
The most recent version of that DVD is from RID, but what year was it actually released? Do we know?
It came out in 2013. It has a blue cover. It's not the red, white, and blue cover. That was the old test, and it's not available anymore. This one is very different.
Okay, so it's different than the old one.
Any other questions? We have a few minutes to go into the performance portion. Yes?
About the long-term and short-term effects of a decision, do we include that in our response, or is that something that's not required?
That is not required. If it happens to fall nicely into an application of a CPC portion of tenant or an illustrative behavior, fine. It's not required like it was in the previous NIC. Okay, let's move ahead to the performance portion. There are 5 of them. You are expected to interpret simultaneously. It says real life. They were taken from real life examples. Of course, when you're sitting in the testing room, that's not exactly real life, but it's as close as we can come. And just like the interview portion, there's a 2-minute introduction to the performance portion. And unlike the interview portion, there's nothing that you could be writing or preparing. You just sit there and read it. It also appears in the practice DVD. And then for 2 minutes, you're given what the situation is about. And then you're told to interpret the conversation. It's called a conversation whether there is one consumer or 3 consumers. It's still called a conversation. For the actual time, check the practice DVD. Not all the scenarios. It says approximately 4 minutes. Some of them are not quite that long. For all of the information, you see that as text on the screen. You don't actually meet, this is one thing that people are concerned about, you don't actually meet your consumers until you begin interpreting. So you see a written description of what the situation is about. The people involved are described, again, as text. Sometimes you will be starting to interpret in the middle of a scenario, not at the beginning. So you are told what happened prior to the part where you are joining in as the interpreter. And then you're told when to begin interpreting. You see a screen that says begin interpreting now, and then up jumps the consumers. This statement from the candidate handbook is not totally accurate. If you are joining in the middle of a scenario, it says here it's similar to the situation that occurs when an interpreter is taking over for another interpreter. Well, not quite. If you're team interpreting, you're there. You get to see what's happened before. You know who the consumers are. This is more similar to video relay interpreting if you take over for another interpreter and you haven't met the consumers before. But again, I mean, this goes against face validity. An interpreter who is qualified to be certified nationally should be able to function well in this environment. Another concern that has been brought up about this test, and it has to do with face validity, is that if, let's say there's a situation where there's only one presenter, let's say it's a hearing presenter, you don't get to see the deaf consumers that you're interpreting for. So there's no way to match their language. You never see them sign like you did with the previous NIC. You're told to interpret into ASL. And if it's a deaf presenter, you don't meet the hearing consumers either. You might be told who they are, but you don't actually see them. So you can match your language accordingly. So that's one thing that people are concerned about. There are five performance scenarios. You can expect at least one to have just a deaf presenter, at least one to have only a hearing presenter, and then you can expect several scenarios that involve deaf and hearing participants, more interactive in nature. So you are told to interpret simultaneously, and as somebody mentioned earlier, you don't control the turn-taking on the test. And let's say it's an interactive scenario of the deaf consumer and a hearing consumer. And let's say your processing time is pretty long, and yet on the test, the next person says something before you finish interpreting what was just said. There's no way that you can control the turn-taking. You have to live within the parameters that are given on the test and adjust accordingly, which is very, very unlike real-world interpreting. They do have allow for some processing time, but a number of people have been concerned that there might not be enough in some instances. Yes, question?
Right, so your suggestion then is if the material is coming in before you've completed your interpretation, should you just pick up with the new information, or do you complete the piece that you're still interpreting? I'm just wondering where you should focus your attention on, wrapping it up or just
I
dropping
wouldn't
it?
suggest dropping any information. That's one of the criteria that you're being evaluated on, is the ability to capture the content. I would suggest you adjust your processing time. Try to finish up the previous thought while taking in the new one, and then just adjust the processing time. Not easy, I know. Oh. Okay, question over here.
So another time that I took the test, they had suggested that if you miss something, you can say simply that in a real-life situation, the interpreter would ask for clarification or repetition. Do you do the same sort of thing on this version of the test, or do you just move forward?
That comes up in another screen, but yes, you can do anything during the test that you would do in a real-life situation. You might say, ask for clarification, ask for repetition, ask for the fingerspelled word again. Yes, you can do that on the test. And the raters will know that you need to do that. Okay, and when the test is finished, don't touch the camera. Just walk out of the room, let the test administrator know that you're finished. And one other thing, don't say anything until the camera is turned off. Because when I was on the certification council, we had one person who appealed a failure because of something, and yet when she had finished her test, before the camera was turned off, she said, "Oh, I failed this." The people listening to her appeal heard that, and actually she had failed before this incident came up. So, but be careful what you say, because it is being recorded. Wait till the camera is turned off before you express any, mainly frustrations or negative comments. Yes, question.
So you mentioned that if you need to go back and repeat the fingerspelling or get clarification, how would that actually happen if it's a video? How would you get the information repeated?
You would say interpreter would ask for clarification.
I
Of course,
see.
you can't physically go back and get it, but it shows the raters that you know what to do. Yes.
Okay, so you're suggesting that we actually would say what you just mentioned. The interpreter would do this and such, right? The interpreter would ask for the consumer to spell that again.
You
Is
would
that
do
how
it however you would do it in real life.
Okay, thank you.
Our time is coming to a close. I did want to mention that if anything unusual happens during testing that might be the basis for an appeal, please make a note of that. There is a form that you can fill out after your test. If you have documented this, however minor it may seem at the time, it needs to be documented. Because before, when I was on certification council, people would appeal, and yet in the form, they said everything was fine. Didn't make any mention of any issues happening. So if there might be an issue, be sure to document it. Is there a question online?
Yes, Tashina asked, if there is a vignette with more than one individual, do we need to identify who is speaking?
Probably yes. If there are 2 hearing people or 2 deaf people. Mainly if there are 2 deaf people signing, you need to identify which one. If it's a hearing person speaking, well, yeah, you probably should. You probably should. That was not a clear answer, but yes. Another question. One more question. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm watching a scenario. There's more than one consumer in that. I would actually have information about their names prior to my actually interpreting, and I would have a picture as well, so I see what they look like, so that way I can match the name and the face of the individual I'm seeing.
You will not see, you will only see text before you start interpreting, but names will be used. They might say, "Oh, Alicia, please tell us." No,
That way you
you're
won't be
clear.
confused
It's clear
who's who.
who is who. I'd like to go through what's left kind of quickly, since our time is running out. I'd rather not show the PowerPoint slides. I'd rather just go through. At the end of the test, there is a feedback form that you are given. You can either fill it out in the room as you're testing, or you can send it in to RID, either by snail mail, faxing, or scanning it and email. I suggest doing it after the test because otherwise you could forget to do it. I'm going to talk briefly about appeals. You have to file any appeals within 90 days of testing. If your appeal is granted, you have a year in which to have a free retake. And there are a number of factors that you can appeal for. If you're given misinformation, let's say you're told the wrong room number, you show up and it's not the place, and you rush over to your testing appointment and you're all out of joint because you went to the wrong room, that could be the basis of an appeal. Test administrator could make an error. It doesn't happen often, but we're human. One time during the old NIC, I forgot to close the door. I remember the test administrator was in and out of the room 10 times. And one time I forgot to close the door. Nothing happened, but that could, if there was noise or distraction in the hall, it could cause somebody not to pass. So if the test administrator did something wrong, you can appeal based on that. If the equipment doesn't work, definitely. If there's a hum in the audio, or if the video screen is distorted. This one, environmental factors, that's the biggest area where people do file appeals. If there's especially noise coming from nearby, I know there was a test site in New York City that people could hear horns honking. You really can't control that. But if there's noise in the environment, that could distract you. And, of course, temperature extremes. If exam materials are damaged, a catastrophic event, that sounds worse than it is. One time we did have a ceiling tile fall down. Fortunately, it happened right before the person tested, not during. But another time, someone had a drape on the wall to show contrasting colors. And during the interpretation, the drape slowly came down. And I saw the tape that the interpreter was interpreting away, and then she looked, and what? This thing's falling down. So if something like that happens, usually you can stop, and it will be fixed, and you can resume your test where it had stopped, and it's not a big deal. Natural disaster, those are few and far between. We did have a couple of times where a hurricane hit. The power went off. I couldn't even get the test DVD out of the machine because the power was off. The person had to come back the next week to continue, but she passed. But you can appeal for all of these things. Now, there are 3 criteria for success on the NIC, and they are in the PowerPoint. We don't have time to go into them, but RID has provided these 3 sets of criteria without telling us which ones are the most important, but they're all good. You have the PowerPoint, and you also have references online to the RID website where you can find these things. It's just about time that we wrap up. I'd like to go to the very end. And I want to give you some suggested resources for continuing preparation for the test. Talk about that. Here are links to, this is on the PowerPoint, you will have access to it, links to some DVDs. There are hundreds of DVDs, or hundreds of videos online at YouTube, but these 3 are very helpful in that they contain a lot of detailed information. They're good to practice with. And there are other helpful resources listed with information on how you can get them for a lot of these categories. Now, if you want practice with hearing consumers, talking about a variety of subjects, this link leads to, it's educational in nature, but there are probably several hundred courses and many lessons inside of courses on a variety of topics. This slide it says resources for practice. And if you want a good resource for ASL to English interpreting, sign up for OIC videos. You'll see deaf people talking about a number of different topics. You can join this free, and if you want more information, you can pay a slight fee for that. Of course, you'll want to have a copy of the NIC DVD. You can order that from RID. At CCBC, we developed a practice DVD in addition. It has 22 ethical scenarios and 5 performance. It's formatted in a similar way to that of the NIC, but not exactly. Yeah, I have some with me today, and this is ordering information if you want to order it. In addition, I teach a class here, an online class here, to prepare for the NIC. It's PST 236. It's a 4-week online class. You submit videos. You do get some feedback for ethical and performance scenarios. And that brings us to the end. There are a couple more interpreting situations, but I want to thank you for your participation. For those who are watching online, complete the post-test, and that's the end. So, okay, somebody is coming up to formally close the session. Melanie, hey.
Hello there. Hi there. Thank you so much. Yes, it's been quite some time. But thank you very much for coming today and sharing this information as you did. Carol Tipton, you've done a wonderful job. We appreciate all the help you've given us in helping folks prepare for certification testing. We appreciate your willingness to be here, first to share the information as you had, and secondly, really to share it with our students as the target population. You know, we have over 100 students who are enrolled in our program at the BA, MA, and doctoral level. We offer all of those programs here. We have the BA and MA programs that prepare individuals to become interpreters, and the PhD program looking more at research. So I wanted to thank all of you who are here on campus, as well as those of you who are watching live stream. Thank you for being involved, and I did want to share with you, we just have a couple of weeks remaining. If you are interested in any of the programs, the BA, MA, or PhD program, please feel free to be in contact with our department to get more information. We also have an email address that we will be sharing with you. It's the interpretation@gallaudet.edu. You can use that contact if you'd like, or if you'd like to look at our website, you're able to pull up the information there. And I am the chair of the department. My name is Melanie Metzger. You can contact me directly or any of our program coordinators, and all of the names are listed on the website. For those of you who are here, I know some of you are already students, but if you're not a student, I did ask that one of our current master's students who has already graduated from the BA program, again, it's designed to really have students matriculate from the BA program to the MA program. So he's graduated from that program. He is here and available if you'd like to ask any questions of him. And as well, we have a number of other students who are here, although I didn't formally ask them to be spokespersons and answer questions. There's a wealth of resources that they can provide to you. So thank you, Hillary Mayhew, for coordinating the event through GURIEC and all of the support you've given us. Also, I wanted to mention the interpreters and appreciate their work today.
All of you, I wanted to give you the chance to put the name and the face together. I'm Hillary. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day. Farewell.
The 1001. Is that on the 10th? There's no 10th floor. It's the first floor. Okay. So I will see those of you who are coming to that session at 1 o'clock. Thank you. I guess we are finished.